Welcome back. Ben is back. It's the day that every Newcastle fan dreaded, and it's the day that every Liverpool fan prayed for, wished for, hoped for. But here we are. Alexander Isak has handed in a transfer request. He wants Liverpool. His priority is Liverpool. He wants to leave Newcastle. And Ben, I said last show when we had you on that we'll get you back, but I didn't think we were going to get you back after 72 hours. But Liverpool are moving so fast in the transfer market, mate. And here we are.
Yeah, I'll repeat what I said before, that Liverpool had never given up on Alexander Isak. And like we said in the last show, whether that's this summer, January, or next summer, you would expect them to be there. Clearly, there's some encouragement from the Isak camp. And the situation is as follows. Isak has told Liverpool and Newcastle that he would like to explore a move. And that gives Liverpool some encouragement. And naturally, it means that Newcastle have to start looking at other options as well. But by the same token, we're not at a bid or even terms agreed with the player yet. And that's important to mention. So it's step by step. And I think Liverpool are still quite cautious, as they were with Florian Wirtz, partially because they know that there's a lot that can happen in terms of twists and turns. And second of all, because player driving the move still results in you having to be able to pull off the deal financially. And this is a big outlay, a British transfer record. Terms would have to be agreed with the player, who's looking for around £300,000 a week. So there's lots to do. And now we have to wait and see whether Liverpool escalate that pursuit. There's no doubt that Isak is open to Liverpool. And there's no doubt that a Liverpool approach is expected. But at this point, they've not placed the bid. Maybe they wait for a Luis Diaz bid from Bayern and decide if they want to sell him. Maybe they wait for Darwin Nunez to depart. But I don't think Liverpool are done yet. And as we said on the last show, another attacker is possible. Isak is on their radar. So all signs now point towards Liverpool moving. But there is caution, as there is with every Liverpool transfer. They don't jump the gun. They don't bid recklessly. They don't try and do things at super speed. They like to be in control of transfers. And at this point, I think they've got Ekitike over the line. And now today they've been given encouragement from the player side, which is very welcome. And now we wait and see how quickly it develops. And my feeling is that there will be one of two extremes here with zero middle ground. Option number one, Liverpool make an approach. Isak is open to the move. And then it will just be about how steadfast Newcastle are, because it's so difficult to keep a player if you know that they want out. But at the other extreme, this noise, this speculation could still result in Newcastle caving on their own financials and trying to offer Isak a new deal. And I think that the player has now got full leverage either way for either an extension or a move away, with almost no possibility, having spoken to sources on the player side and on the Newcastle side, of a kind of middle ground where he just stays. So 6 months ago, I think the feeling within Newcastle was, if they get Champions League football, doesn't matter if he doesn't sign a new deal, because he's contracted for 3 years and there's no release clause and he's well paid. Now, I think it almost untenable that Alexander Isak could just remain as a Newcastle player on this current deal. So I think we're at those two extremes now, where either Liverpool bid, players open to that, he would welcome a bid, or alternatively, nobody comes in for him or nobody meets the Newcastle valuation. And then I think we would be in new deal territory.
If you had a look at the Liverpool Twitter today, Ben, there's no sense of caution.
That's balanced, you know, we've got to stay balanced. We're Newcastle in all of this as well.
Of course. But we're here to dream. But when can we expect a formal approach from Liverpool?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I think it could be informed by Luis Diaz. So Bayern are encouraged by the Diaz situation. And as myself and colleague Alex Crook broke a few days ago, they're prepared to go up as high as 80 million euros. But anything above that, they could walk away. And their latest bid, not quite at that top end valuation, is expected to be in and around the 75 million euros mark. And of course, if Liverpool decide to sell Luis Diaz, they've got a big decision to make, because they leave themselves short on the left-hand side. Ekitike can also play out wide. maybe there's a formation change if Isak joins, or they decide to stick with what they've got in wide areas and use that money towards a number 9, knowing that Ekitike might not be enough if Darwin Núñez, as expected, also departs. So there's a few internal considerations. And I think the speed at which Liverpool do or don't move is not really that relevant in this story, because as I've said many, many times, and I'll repeat it in case anybody is new on this feed, Liverpool rarely bid blindly. And when they enter a race, it's usually with confidence. And therefore, if they feel Isak is open to the move, they won't be that concerned, in my opinion, about timescales. They'll be more concerned about, is it the right move now? Is it the right price now? And how do they ultimately fund it, even though they feel in a very strong PSR position? So I wouldn't get sucked in by the timing. It's very easy to say, because Isak has said he wants to leave, it automatically means that Liverpool bid today, tomorrow, and then that's that. You can never say never, but the impression I'm getting from Liverpool is very much there are some internal conversations and steps to be had before this really sets alight. So it's not to say they won't make an approach. As I reported about half an hour ago, my understanding is that an approach is anticipated, but I don't think we're yet at the stage where we can necessarily put a timescale on it. Newcastle and Liverpool are abroad on different time zones. So I think patience and caution is needed here, simply because with any deal of this magnitude, and it was the same with Florian Wirtz, it could take a little bit of time should it develop. But there's no doubt that Alexander Isak remains a priority for Liverpool, whether that's now, whether that's January, or whether that's next summer. And the fact the player's head has been turned can only give Liverpool encouragement.
Can you see it dragging out though, man?
Well, I mean, it can only drag out if it's going to happen this summer for 6 weeks or so, because that's how long is left in the window. I think if Newcastle United, which is another factor in all of this, find a replacement, the door becomes open. And that's where Benjamin Sesko or even Lois Openda and Johan Wissa, even though they're not all like for like, they all come into play. So from Newcastle's point of view...
Are they Newcastle targets from what your...
Yeah, those three are all Newcastle targets. And the Benjamin Sesko one is probably the biggest clue of all, because if they bid for Benjamin Sesko, they can't pull off that deal without basically spending the Isak money. That's my understanding. The finances of a Sesko deal for Newcastle are quite difficult, but they become less difficult if Alexander Isak leaves. And therefore, Sesko for me would be the most light for light replacement for Alexander Isak. When it was Hugo Ekitike, the Newcastle message was very much it's Ekitike and Isak. My feeling with Sesko at the moment is if they move for Sesko over, for example, Wissa or Openda or some other targets, it'll be a clear indication that they are in many ways planning for an Alexander Isak exit. And that may be another clue in the narrative. And Liverpool are always about timing. And what you have to understand about timing is if you bid now, on the day it's become apparent that Isak wants to leave, Newcastle may shut you down and steadfastly stick to their position, because there's some within Newcastle that are adamant that by hook or by crook, they'll still find a way to get Alexander Isak to sign a new deal. And that's what I mean about both extremes and no middle ground. If Newcastle get a replacement, then that might be the right kind of time to start a formal conversation. And in that gap, Newcastle may have brought in funds for either Luis Diaz or alternatively Darwin Núñez. So there's a lot of moving parts on the side of both clubs. And I would again urge a little bit of caution on the Liverpool side, simply because if they are to move for Alexander Isak, and there is an anticipation, because they only told Newcastle 10, 12 days ago they were prepared to spend British transfer record money. But before they do that, there will have to be all these different steps. The internal discussion, an approach to the Isak side to discuss terms, which hasn't happened in any detail yet, a formal bid. The formal bid will have to be informed by the fact that at the moment they don't have a price. So this £150 million number is very much Newcastle's valuation based on a book price, but it's not being counted or given to any suitors. So is it 120? Is it 130? Is it 150? Is it 170? And so on. And at this point, there's a lot of legwork to be done. And if you think back to Florian Wirtz, when it was first broke, Liverpool were interested. They went from being cautious because he might stay in Germany to being confident because they had buy-in from the player side, to then engaging into talks. And those talks took a couple of weeks. And if Isak materializes, and I know I sound more cautious than maybe fans are at the moment, but if it materializes, which is anticipated that they'll try in some capacity, then I think it will follow a very similar timescale and path to the cautious and discreet one that eventually got Wirtz over the line. The good news as well is that, contrary to some suggestions, Richard Hughes has got a fantastic relationship with Newcastle United Football Club. So if anything happens, then I have every confidence that Richard Hughes will drive the business and do so knowing that he can hold, if the window is open to sell Isak, productive talks. But right now, I think you'd expect Newcastle to stick to their not for sale stance, simply because of the fact that they have a glimmer that Isak might sign a new deal. And more importantly, it's always going to be not for sale, at least officially or formally, until they line up a replacement.
There's 2,000 people in the building, as Saj Iqbal says, or as we know him, is Gene. Subscribe and smash the like button. There was a famous line from the great Muhammad Salah about 6 months ago, Ben, and he scared the living daylights of every single Liverpool fan when he said, "I'm more out than in." Would you say that is the case for Alexander Isak right now, as things stand?
Yeah, he's more out than in, because he's literally out of a pre-season tour. He was out of a Celtic friendly. And you may note in my reporting, because it's important to be fair to Newcastle in all of this and be balanced and go to all sides, which is what we do as journalists. Newcastle's position remains that Alexander Isak has a minor thigh injury. But what's also true is that he asked not to go on the tour. Technically, both things can be true. He can have an injury and he can ask not to go on tour. But within my reporting, I stressed very clearly that the scans came back clear. And it's very unusual from experience for a player who has a minor thigh injury with scans that are clear not to travel. So this is why everything has snowballed, because there was only so long that those close to Isak or those close to Newcastle could let this run with constant emission before it would be clear that the player's head has been turned. And that's where we're at the moment. So yes, he's more out because he literally is out, but a lot can change naturally, because if Newcastle decide to pay £300,000 a week, the finances get taken out of the equation. And then Isak has to decide whether he wants to stay at least another season or go. There could be a scenario where Newcastle decide to give him a release clause or a verbal pact that if he does one more year, then he can leave after that. All options are on the table, but at both extremes. Again, I don't see a middle ground where it can just remain as is. So I think it's exit or new deal. And I think Liverpool's perspective, coming back to the caution, is a lot of this noise may be a ploy to give Isak every single option under the sun. In other words, it's a ploy to say, get Newcastle to get the terms for a new deal, get suitors out the woodwork, then decide what he wants to do. So I know it'd be really easy to come on a Liverpool feed and just say, get excited about Isak, he's joining. But all I can tell you at this point is that the player would welcome a Liverpool bid, and a Liverpool approach to see if the deal is possible is at least anticipated. But what is also not impossible is that all of this is about noise to get Isak everything he wants, every option away from Newcastle, all the terms he wants for a Newcastle extension, and then he'll have to pick whether he wants to stay or go. And that's where we're at the moment. And I think it's vital in reporting not to sell clickbait or false streams. So the full context of the situation is really important.
But do you believe that Isak would request to leave without having assurances from Liverpool?
Well, I think there's requesting to leave and there's requesting to leave. And by that, I mean there's forcing your way out of a club like Moises Caicedo did to Chelsea, and there's formally handing in a transfer request. And then there's, I don't want to go on the pre-season tour because I want to explore all options, including an exit. And from what I'm told, Isak has said very clearly to Newcastle he wants to leave. But to leave, you have to meet Newcastle's valuation, you have to meet Isak's terms, and you have to probably facilitate some outgoings from Liverpool's perspective. You have Al Hilal, who are prepared to make a bid as well, but they've not really engaged on the Isak side because their understanding is that Isak wants to stay within the Premier League. And then we've heard a lot of noise about Chelsea. We know Arsenal saw him as a dream target before Victor Gyökeres arrived. Man United have even been mentioned, but none of these clubs are in the race. So it feels like Isak only has two major destinations, unless PSG come calling out of nowhere. And they are looking for a new striker, but I'm not aware of an approach at this stage. But right now it feels like Liverpool or Saudi, and Saudi can afford Isak, but Isak doesn't want to go at this point. We'll have to wait and see if that develops. And then you have an openness to Liverpool, but they've got to make the finances work and decide whether they're going to move post Hugo Ekitike. And that's where we are now. So I think the Isak situation is intentional, because when you start a preseason tour, you're starting your season. And if he's seen in the new kit, if he's playing in preseason games, then in likelihood, Newcastle hold all the cards, because then they can try and offer him a new deal. But if the valuation isn't met, you get closer and closer to the season, and Newcastle just points to the fact that he's contracted for 3 years. There's no release clause, and he's already very well paid. And that leads towards club power over player power. Whereas the backstory here to understand is that Isak wanted a new deal a year ago, and Paul Mitchell decided not to give him one because he was already well contracted. And at that point, it was 2024. And his contract was 2028. So Isak probably would have signed a new deal and ended all this noise and speculation, maybe even without a release clause, if he was offered improved terms a year ago. Flash forwards, and he's not forgotten that. And that's why we're in a situation now where Isak has taken a bit of the control over this story away from Newcastle, and he's the one pushing his own narrative now. But again, I stress at the time we're live anyway, both those extremes of Newcastle potentially having to throw the kitchen sink at Isak to try and get him to sign a new deal and break their wage structure in doing so, or more likely at this stage, simply because of the player's perspective, an inviting of offers. And then we have to see whether Newcastle are prepared to entertain a number. Because I think at 120, maybe even 130, Liverpool will very seriously consider it. And that will be the ballpark, I think, for their valuation. And given that the player is essentially refusing to go on a tour, they might even start a little bit lower, because the price drops to some extent if the player is saying he's going to sit out games. But then if it's countered by a Newcastle valuation of 150, it obviously complicates the situation as well. So there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of games at stake. And again, it's really important, I think, when we report this as journalists, to give you the information as of now and try and be as balanced and respectful to all sides as possible. And I can tell you that Liverpool are interested, but they're also very cautious about the next steps, because there is a feeling that some of this is being done to drive an exit, and some of this is being done to drive the best possible terms out of Newcastle United to try and keep the player.
So there's no news about Liverpool agreeing personal terms with Alexander Isak?
No, I mean, as I posted, and I did check this story out because I was getting some whispers from certain people, and I know one or two have said terms are already agreed. At the time we're live, I can categorically say there are no terms agreed between Alexander Isak and Liverpool. I don't think terms would be a problem. So I'm not sure that it's anywhere near the top of the list of worries for Liverpool, but they haven't gone to the player and discussed those terms in any detail yet. It could move very fast. It wouldn't be that difficult to get terms in place with Isak. But the suggestion as of now, anything can happen in a window in a matter of minutes or hours or days. But as of now, suggestions terms are agreed, 100% in place or anything like that, are wide of the mark, according to my information.
Ben, there is a feeling, even though Alexander Isak comes in, Liverpool, in a funny way, might leave themselves short. And what I mean by that is, if Chiesa leaves, if Nunes leaves, if, as expected, Luis Diaz leaves to Bayern Munich, and then that leaves Cody Gakpo, Hugo Ekitike, Alexander Isak, and Mohamed Salah. Is there another winger that we could be interested in? Obviously, Malik Fofana has been mentioned. Anyone else that you've heard about?
Yeah, it's hard to sort of answer that question, as we discussed on the last show, because we also need to be very respectful to Diogo Jota and his family and Andre Silva. And Liverpool internally are in this period of grieving, but the window's only got 6 weeks. So they'll have to assess broadly how thin they feel in an attacking sense. And naturally, if Luis Diaz and Darwin Nunez leave, then you would think, if it is Alexander Isak, there might be room for a winger. But perhaps this is why Liverpool are so staunch at the moment in their not for sale stance. And we mustn't forget that, because people are working on the assumption that Diaz goes, Nunez goes, and that's how they fund Isak. But I actually think there's as much of a logic for saying to Luis Diaz, stay for another year. And then if Darwin Nunez departs, you go, okay, do we just replace him with a number 9, i.e. Alexander Isak? And then you've got Isak Ekitike and still Luis Diaz. So I think these are the internal considerations. And then it's further complicated by the fact that if Alexander Isak can go, I'm not going on pre-season tour, and then was to get a move anywhere, why doesn't Luis Diaz go? That's a great tactic for me to do. So it's going to be quite complicated because you have a situation not quite the same as Isak, but with Diaz where he wants to go. He's open to Bayern. And that might mean that Liverpool have to prioritize a winger over a number 9. It might mean they have to think about collective budget for a number 9 and a winger. But it's very difficult to get the full picture because, again, I come back to that really important point that first and foremost, as journalists, we have to be very respectful to the memory of Diogo Jota, and nobody from a offering players perspective and nobody within Liverpool wants to really face this possibility of saying, how do we factor that into our market at this point? So I've been very careful in my reporting to be respectful to all sides, to talk about the things we definitively know, which are Diaz not for sale, but maybe at the right price, mind changed, and Nunez expected to leave. Jota could be factored into thinking, but it's not a question I've asked because I don't think it's appropriate so close to the tragedy. And then when they're thinking collectively about versatile players, about central players that could get wide, about whether they want a winger or a number 9, it's kind of unclear at this stage. So all we can say definitively is if they have the budget and with certain outgoings, another attacker of some sorts will arrive. Let's wait and see if they go all in on Isak, whether they go all in on a left winger, whether they go all in on both. There's lots of different permutations, but a part of the puzzle is missing. And again, because Liverpool are a grieving club, it's very difficult and it feels a bit disrespectful to be thinking about how Jota may influence their view of the attackers and whether that means they might go for 2 instead of 1. Maybe when the dust settles and when it feels a bit more appropriate, it will be the kind of thing that journalists start asking and investigating. But at this stage, I think that we should just think of the attacking possibilities in light of a Diaz exit and the fact that Darwin Nunez also might depart.
And was there any monitoring from different clubs, Chelsea, Arsenal? We saw a delay when Arsenal were kind of, there was a point in the summer transfer window, Ben, where Arsenal were looking for the kind of striker they were going for. There was talk of Sesko, there was talk of Gyökeres, and there was a silence amongst the news, and the fans thought, where the hell is our striker? Was Arsenal considering Alexander Isak as an option and literally just said, I got a no from the player side and then moved on the Gyökeres deal? Did you hear anything about Arsenal or Chelsea's interest in the player?
I think most suitors just felt, some may still feel, that Isak not genuinely available. And from Arsenal's point of view, the finances of that very difficult because the PSR position of Arsenal is fine, but I think it's fair to say that Liverpool's is still healthier. Both are okay though. And then the other factor is that Arsenal did Zubimendi, they did Norgard, they did Noni Madueke. All of that ate into budget. They bought Kepa in, Mosquera's joined. So if you add Victor Gyökeres and still potentially want another attacking midfielder, I think Arsenal's perspective is that 200 to 250 million that they may spend all in can get them several players. Soon as you go to Isak, it might have been at the expense, for example, of Noni Madueke, whereas I think Liverpool have just got a bit more headroom if they proceed. Obviously, we're talking about an outlay quite nonchalantly, and it would double Liverpool's summer outlay, give or take, if they were to go down the line of Alexander Isak for 150 million, for example. So Arsenal's perspective was very much Isak is not available either at all or at value. And I'm not even aware that they made an approach of note to Newcastle United. Then Chelsea only entertained Isak a year ago when Newcastle's PSR position was very tight before Elliot Anderson went to Nottingham Forest and Yakubu Minter went to Brighton, and they made a call to understand the situation and they were told not for sale. And remember, a year on, still officially as of today, Isak is not for sale. So Chelsea are not going to enter the race. Man United are not going to enter the race. Arsenal are not going to enter the race. And it feels like Liverpool, Saudi, and perhaps, although I don't have any indication yet, PSG. PSG have got appreciation for Isak before he joined Newcastle, but I'm not aware of anything active at the moment. And that's kind of where we stand. But the next step in all of this, regardless of noise and what Isak thinks, is there actually a price? Because Liverpool already made their first inquiry and were told not for sale. Liverpool already showed their hand and said that they would bid around 120 million. So imagine if Newcastle turn around and say 150 or 200 million, then things could go very quiet very quickly as well. So it's step by step, really. And I know people are going to want minute or daily updates, but I think these kind of deals, even if it heads in a positive direction for Liverpool, are sensitive and time consuming. And at the moment, we have to wait for that formal approach from Liverpool, which has not been made yet, but is anticipated. And that will help Liverpool understand whether, with Isak wanting to leave, this is a feasible deal or it still remains a 150 plus million deal and not for sale type deal, in which case we may hear a lot of noise and actually not that much movement. So that's the sort of challenge of reporting, to give you a bit of insight, that people want answers quicker than the story actually moves. And if Liverpool don't know yet, and if Newcastle don't know yet, and if Isak doesn't know yet, then really all we should safely report is that the player's open to Liverpool and the player wants to leave. And now the next steps, I think, are going to be quite complex and quite discreet before we get the kind of next piece of the puzzle.
Let's just quickly go through a few super chats, and it's a pleasure and honor to have my brother Leo watching the show as well. You know the face, you know the Instagram account, and he says, "My brother, this is crazy. 2,500 people nearly in the building, Ben, and provide you giving us this insight, and I'm so glad. It's a pleasure having you on all the time in the space of 72 hours, and I'm glad you came on short notice." Let's quickly go through the super chats. Muhammad Ahmed, much respect for your time alongside for your work this window. Ben Isak, feelings.
Thanks, Mohammed.
Or Ola Kunule, I'm sorry if I butchered that. Any news on Rodrigo? Love him also, Ben.
Yeah, people are getting a bit carried away with Rodrigo because there's various influential people in football with a mandate to try and find him a new club in case he chooses to leave Real. But the Liverpool perspective is very much Rodrigo's an expensive deal. There's clear appreciation, the same for Arsenal, but we're not at a stage of any advanced talks or even club-to-club talks because Rodrigo is coming back from his holiday. So step one is he speaks to Xabi Alonso and then decides if he wants to leave or whether he's prepared to fight for his place or resign himself to more minutes on the right instead of the left. And only when Rodrigo tells Real what he wants to do could he become available on the market, at which point Real are prepared to sell for 90 million euros. And a lot of Liverpool fans ask me, could it be Isak and Rodrigo? Well, I highly, highly doubt that, to be perfectly honest with you. And they're different kinds of profiles. And it may be, as we said in the last answer, that Liverpool only go for one of those types of profiles. So I'm not aware of anything advanced between Liverpool and Rodrigo at this stage other than appreciation. And I know it's not much of an update, but that again is because there will not be, whatever anything says or whatever social media thinks, there will not be a meaningful new Rodrigo update until he's had that meeting with Xabi Alonso. And because after the Club World Cup, he was given 3 weeks off, that meeting hasn't yet happened. So the possibility of Rodrigo moving to the Premier League will not be clearer, I think, until early or middle next week. And then I'll try and bring you the latest at that point.
We also got an in-house IDK in Kevin Laird. He broke the news in our WhatsApp group. Big up, Kevin. He's always in the chat, showing love and respect. Gents, agreement in place for a guaranteed 130 million. Broke the story earlier on X for Isak. Big up, Kevin. Kevin's back with another super chat. I have it on good authority that terms are agreed. We're gonna see Alexander Isak in a Liverpool shirt by tomorrow, according to Kevin.
I mean, like I said, I have nothing against fans who are passionate and pay hard-earned money, super chats or season ticket holders.
100%.
Get excited because the window's all about this. Sometimes you can still have fun chasing targets, whether they come off or not. And, you know, I said this when I revealed it months ago that Liverpool had not given up on Alexander Isak. And at that point, there was all of the pushback from many, many Newcastle fans saying, never going to happen, not for sale. Even a month ago, never going to happen, not for sale. But clearly something is happening. Whether the deal comes off remains to be seen. Whether Liverpool move remains to be seen. I get that people will like the reporting when it's going to happen. He wants the club. It's going to get done. They're going to bid. I understand that when that's the line that reporting takes, it's very exciting to fans. But we have to be accurate. And it is a step-by-step saga that may result in a formal bid, but may result in an Isak new contract as well. You just don't know. And until I have a clearer picture, I'm going to be a little bit more cautious than those super chats. But what I would say is that if it gets done and at 130 million, then come back on the show and I'll pay the £2 for the super chat and you can come and do this show instead, because then you will be able to gloat.
Oh, hope you've heard that, Kevin. Thank you so much, brother. Jack, any news on a second club for Liverpool? Just quickly, Ben.
In terms of the multi-club?
Yeah.
Yeah, they obviously were exploring different options. Bordeaux was the one that didn't really come off. And I think that was partially down to the finances of the deal. Malaga, I'm told, is still live, but it's complicated because they're effectively in a form of administration. And you've got the majority of the club owned by a Qatari owner and then the rest of the club with a different owner. So without going into too much detail, they like Malaga because you're going to find that the stadium for Malaga is a World Cup stadium and it's been renovated or is being renovated. So the infrastructure is very strong, but there are quite a lot of complications about how you actually negotiate for that club and with who, because there's a judicial process ongoing to determine the fate of the club. And there's effectively two different owners. And then what adds further complication is the fact that QSI are also interested in Malaga. And of course, with the Qatari side of that club, that's Qatar negotiating with Qatar. So you would think that they've got an advantage. One thing I can say is that it's not unthinkable for Malaga that FSG and QSI decide to have some conversations about whether they could even work together. I don't think that's the priority for either side at the moment. I think each of them are just keen on exploring Malaga and seeing whether they stand a chance of buying the club. But it isn't impossible because QSI, as they've shown with Braga, are also happy with minority investment and therefore don't always need to be hands-on in buying 100% of a football club. So I think you've got three scenarios there. One is that FSG see value in it and proceed, and there's still a determination. Two is QSI just buy the club and are in a strong position to an extent because of their relationship with the Qatari owner, but everyone's in a weaker position because the club is effectively under judicial governance. So you have to resolve the judicial governance, effectively administration, or you have to deal with the administrators, in which case having a Qatari owner and having a prospective Qatari buyer doesn't really help you. So it is pretty complicated. But you may see a scenario where they decide some kind of compromise and some kind of dual purchase that involves both QSI and FSG. I'm not aware that's FSG's preference, but I am aware that QSI would be open to that possibility.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that. Let me keep on going. You've got 5 minutes. We'll just quickly go through the super chat and we'll let you get off, Ben. Ganto, Ben, thanks for your time. Does Newcastle ownership with PIF complicate any approach for Isak from Saudi clubs?
I don't think so, because they're technically separate entities. So there's no link between the Saudi clubs and Newcastle in a multi-club sense. It's PIF and PIF. So you would think the negotiation would be quite simple because Newcastle's chair is Yasser Al-Rumayyan and PIF's chair is Yasser Al-Rumayyan. But Yasser Al-Rumayyan is not directly involved in any capacity with Al Hilal, who are the club credited with an interest, although I'm not aware of anything particularly advanced at this stage. The desire of Saudi to make a bid or prep a bid is more central, and that's normal, because when any top player is available, they'll prepare a bid. But that doesn't mean talks are advanced. That doesn't mean there's any engagement. That doesn't mean that anything is moving, and nothing would change unless Alexander Isak became open to Saudi Arabia. But if those conversations took place, it wouldn't necessarily be any conflict, because it'd be Yasser Al-Rumayyan or Newcastle's recruitment team dealing with Al Hilal, i.e. their president, Fahad bin Nafel. And there's no conflict or overlap between specifically Fahad bin Nafel and either Yasser Al-Rumayyan or alternatively Newcastle's hierarchy. And that's why I think if Al Hilal enter the race, whether by club or centrally, it wouldn't provide much of a conflict. But what I would say is that Saudi dealmakers for Kylian Mbappe, when he was falling out with PSG a couple of years ago, made a world record bid. And they did so to grandstand, knowing it stood very little chance of success. And they basically said to Mbappe, come for a year and then we'll let you leave on a free transfer to Real Madrid. And Mbappe was never going to accept that. But PSG accepted the bid. And why? Knowing that Mbappe wouldn't go, because it provided a market valuation for the player. And then Real Madrid, if they wanted to buy Mbappe a year earlier, would have to go higher, because the market is showing, even though Saudi will inflate their offers at times, that this is what the valuation is of the player. Yeah. So it wouldn't remotely surprise me, more for grandstanding and headlines than because there seems a chance of success. But we'll have to wait and see, because Isak would have to change his mind about Saudi for it to actually gather legs. But there might still be a situation where Saudi bid just for the sake of bidding, because it shows ambition, it makes headlines, and that might help Newcastle, because if they bid 200 million, then anybody else would have to meet that valuation. Otherwise, there's a likelihood that Newcastle don't accept any kind of offer. So don't be surprised if Saudi muscle their way into this narrative. But my understanding is very clear at this stage that Alexander Isak has not engaged directly with Al Hilal and doesn't at this stage want to go to Saudi Arabia. Will that stop a bid? Perhaps not. Will that stop some Saudi headlines? Perhaps not again. But I think if Isak was to leave, he would want to go somewhere where he has Champions League football.
Okay. We've got about 4 or 5 super chats. So I'm just going to go through, and because we've run out of time, you'll just, if you don't mind, guys, just put it, don't send another super chat but when we're back at 10:30. Just send it as I'll take a picture of these names now and we'll discuss your super chat at the 10:30 show. But I'll put them on screen right now. Samuel L, Malik Fofana, maybe Ben, we've discussed that already. Kevin Led, he's not stopping today. Newcastle to sign Sesko and Visser first, and then us sell a forward and sell a forward to us, I think he means. Samuel, is Wharton a future long-term target, Ben? We'll discuss that. I wish I could ask Ben the question. And then we have another one, Benny Boy. Any other names on Rodrigo and Fofana that Romano mentioned? If Diaz leaves, any names that he has not reached, that have not reached the public? Ben, any names? Just the names?
Yeah, I mean, Fofana is definitely one, and more of a budget option. So if there was a scenario where they had a number 9 and a left winger, like I said before, I don't think it could be Rodrigo and Alexander Isak, but I'm not given much encouragement on the Rodrigo side at this stage, simply because it's not a live topic. It's a player that needs to communicate to his club first. Then we'll understand if there are any Premier League opportunities. Lots of clubs appreciate Rodrigo. Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, as I revealed and broke at the beginning of the window. But does that translate into anything? We'll have to wait and see. Regarding other left-sided targets, Anthony Gordon remains appreciated. And it was very close to a done deal 12 months ago, like I said, with the PSR situation and the late moves for Elliot Anderson to Nottingham Forest and Yakubu Minter to Brighton. That was really what changed the situation. But Liverpool had an outline deal with Newcastle for Anthony Gordon, and the player's head was turned. So it's unlikely 12 months are going to pass. and Gordon is not going to be appreciated when he was 12 months ago. But of course, again, it won't be Anthony Gordon and Alexander Isak either. So if they approach Newcastle for anybody, you would think that their first priority would still be Alexander Isak. So there's, again, a few moving parts here. And there's nobody else I'm really hearing at this stage on the left-hand side. Wharton, liked by Liverpool, liked by Manchester City. Again, no approaches at this stage to Crystal Palace. My expectation is Wharton will stay. I think it will be the same in likelihood with Jean-Philippe Mateta. Not sure where those links with Liverpool came from, but I'm not aware of anything in them. And then naturally, if Palace are going to sell anyone, it might be Eze with Arsenal interested because he's got a release clause. And it might well be Mark Gahey to Liverpool, who is a player on the radar. What's quite telling about the defensive situation is at this stage, and I stress at this stage, Liverpool have not tried to hijack or enter the talks for Joel Hatto, and Chelsea are really advancing there. But Hatto is a player that Liverpool really like. And I think maybe what's put them off that deal is either the price or the fact that if you're signing Hatto, it's left-back, centre-back cover. And ultimately, Milos Kerkez has come in at left back. So if you sign Hatto, he's centre back only, and maybe they feel that there's other options that they wish to chase. But if Liverpool were to move on Hatto and the appreciation is genuine, they'd have to be fast. And then regarding Gahey, the price in all of this. So Crystal Palace have been asking for 45 to 50 million throughout the window. Palace want to sell because they know that Gay's not going to renew. Liverpool are prepared to do the deal, but they'll only bid if it's significantly north of 45 million pounds. So if the price drops during the window, Gay and Liverpool could be one to watch. But Liverpool sources have sort of implied to me that this defender might come in late in the window, and that adds a bit of fire to the fact that you leave Palace sweating on Gay for just a little bit longer, and then you hope the price drops. And the other complication in the Gahey situation is that the player himself is absolutely prepared just to stay at Crystal Palace and wait, because he knows he's going to play every week. So Gay's got no issue doing a season at Palace, playing in the World Cup, leaving on a free transfer. So there's two parts to this story. One is the Palace price going to drop? And two is Gahey going to push or agitate for a move? And if he doesn't, then actually from his perspective, he's perfectly fine just to play every week at Crystal Palace and then decide on his future after the World Cup.
Brilliant. Ben, thank you so much for your time. Insightful.
Always a pleasure, mate.
Brilliant, as ever. I just wanted to end on this super chat. There was over 2,500 people watching. Ash, thank you very much, brother, for the super chat. Ash used to be, Ben, in the chat when we used to have not even 50, about 5 people watching us. And he says, I remember when there was only 50 of us. You are big time now. I say full credit to you and the BNR team. How's your Isak feelings now? My Isak feelings as a fan are in overdrive right now.
I'm having to calm everybody down.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Smash a like, subscribe to the channel, and head over to the BNR membership. It's $4.99 a month. It helps us grow, and it's gonna bring you so much exclusive content, watch-alongs, tactical shows, fan cams, you name it. I promised you guys with a small little peek. And you know what? At 8 or 9 o'clock, I'm going to give you a peek on Twitter as to what's coming on BNR. But do not go away. We're back at 10:30. And do not go away, because Liverpool, you get the sense, are going to break the internet once more. Have a good night. We see you soon. Bye for now.